pleased to be able, I'm very pleased to have Marjorie Mitchell here today. For some of us old timers, we go back quite a ways because Marjorie has been a pioneer, a real pioneer in terms of advocating for healthcare for all. She's been the executive director for Michigan for over 30 years. Is that correct, Margie?
Yep.
And she's a person who cares about what's happening in this country. And Margie, would you like to tell us just a little bit more about what you're doing and and maybe you'll get into this in your presentation about why does Project 2025 matter to you? But the topic will be understanding your vote, Project 2025, and Project 2025 involves threats to our rights and to our democracy. So Margie, let's hear it from you.
Well, I am going to cover a lot of that in the presentation. So I've been with Michigan, which is Michigan Universal Healthcare Action Network, for over 30 years. We had worked in the early 90s. We had a single payer piece of legislation that came up every year in the Michigan legislature. Never got very far, but we did a lot of education. We've been really active in getting the ACA passed and in getting Medicaid expansion in Michigan. So we're still working on a lot of those things. So at any rate, let's go on. What is Project 2025? It's a far-right Republican vision of America developed by the Heritage Foundation, a right-wing think tank. It's a blueprint for the next Trump presidency to be implemented immediately upon his swearing in and over his first 180 days. Now, this is not new for the Heritage Foundation. They have been doing these kinds of reports since 1981. This is the 9th iteration. It involved 400 writers, 140 of whom worked for the first Trump administration, and it cost $22 million. Mr. Trump has tried to distance himself from Project 2025, but his vice presidential nominee wrote the foreword to the project. And much of the agenda outlined are things that he and Mr. Trump have supported over the years. And I want you to know that there is so much in it. I have picked out 4 or 5 areas to talk about. And, you just can't do every little detail that's in there. I have not read all 900 pages, but I've read a lot of reading on the project. There are 4 pillars to the project. The first pillar is a playbook, which develops teams and transition plans so that they would each have things to do upon Mr. Trump's swearing in. The second is a private database in which they would hope to screen 20,000 loyalists to Mr. Trump and use them to be appointed to the new government. So it is people who are planning the transition. It is identifying people to fill positions. And there's also a training aspect called the Presidential Administration Academy, so that everyone that they choose is going to be trained on how best to implement their area of expertise. 4, it is a 900-page mandate for leadership, the conservative promise, with an agenda for completely reforming our government. Now, as we look at the issues within Project 2025 and discuss it, I want you to think about American values voiced in our nation's founding documents and critically evaluate whether or not this project's agenda supports these values. Some of these values are equality, freedom, liberty, justice, fairness, and a government that would ensure domestic tranquility, which we don't have today, and provide for our common defense. I also want you to hear the definition of fascism and evaluate whether this agenda is consistent or inconsistent with this approach to government. Definition of fascism: a form of right-wing authoritarianism, ultranationalist political ideology, and movement characterized by a dictatorial leader, centralized authority, militarism, and forcible oppression of opposition. So keep thinking about what our Constitution and our founding documents say and what a definition of fascism is. So let's look at some of the agenda, remembering that many proposals will require congressional approval, which may be hard to get. So, there's a ray of hope. But some in the project can just be initiated by executive order, and we'll talk about a few of those later on. So let's talk about healthcare, the thing that's nearest and dearest to my heart. They want to repeal the ACA and return to what we had before the ACA, and that is with insurance companies totally in charge of our healthcare. Millions would lose coverage, and others would have plans that lack the ACA protections, such as pre-existing conditions or leaving your children on your policy until they are 21. It would end medication abortion. It would allow hospitals to deny life-saving abortion services to a pregnant woman in crisis. It requires the prosecution of people shipping or transporting abortion pills. It permits harassment of patients and staff at abortion clinics. Dave, you and I have tried to be at abortion clinics a lot in the past to safeguard people who were using the services. This permits it. So it makes it difficult to acquire birth control products, including condoms. And there is a federal ban on care related to gender identity. For Medicare, it wants to defund and privatize certain aspects of the program. I can't tell you all of them, but they're working on that. And they want to deregulate Medicare Advantage plans and make them the default enrollment option, which really means that over time, when they do that, that Medicare Advantage will become Medicare. I mean, Medicare as we know it will no longer be. Under Medicaid, they want to make Medicaid a state block grant program, which we fought very hard and succeeded when we had the opportunity under the ACA to expand the Medicaid program. There was strong effort in our state legislature to make it a block grant program, and we pushed that back. Because if it's a block grant program, it means you just get a pot of money no matter how many people you serve. And if there's plenty more people who come in and need served, all they do is get less service. It is just a terrible way when you are working with low income and people with real difficult health problems. Allows state Medicaid dollars to be taken from the state if they allow private policies to cover abortions. So that if we had any insurance company decided they wanted to do that, they would just take away all the Medicaid money. It limits the coverage of contraceptive options, again, including condoms, and it bans the mailing of abortion pills. For LGBTQ people, it scales back laws that prohibit discrimination based on the sex. It prioritizes religious-based objections to treating sexual and gender minority patients. It ends support for single-parent or LGBTQ families, which is a biggie. It means that if you happen to have a family and you choose to adopt a child and you are a single person, a lot of supports that the government now gives to help, you wouldn't be able to get. Education. Dismantle the Department of Education at the federal level, eliminate Head Start, discontinue Title I programs that provide federal funding to schools serving low-income children, rescind the federal civil rights protections for LGBTQ students. It reduces funding for people with disabilities. It promotes a universal private school of choice. And the above changes all require Congress to act. Whether or not any of them could get through, we don't know. And you don't need to, let me tell you, you don't need to take long lists on all of these things. All you have to do on your area of interest is Google Project 2025 effect on education, healthcare, economy, whatever, which is what I spent a lot of time doing over the last months. But there are some things in the Department of Education or in the area of education that can just be done by executive order. Boy, I don't know what's going on. Excuse me. By executive order, civil rights protections for LGBTQ students can be rolled back. Title IX protections can be rolled back. They can dismantle the whole civil rights enforcement apparatus. Yeah. Somebody saying something? They can eliminate the current income-driven student loan repayment plans. So it means that everybody's the amount they would repay for their student loans would go up. And they would end the teaching of diversity, equity, and inclusion in schools and in all government trainings. Yes. In the area of the economy, there would be broad tax cuts to corporations and income. They would eliminate or restructure the Federal Reserve. They would weaken the oversight of financial markets. They would increase energy production by expanding fossil fuels, oil and natural gas production. They would save money by their overhauls of Medicare and Medicaid, and they would weaken labor law. There would be cuts to retirement benefits for federal employees, and they would make it more difficult to get unemployment benefits. They would end the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and they would overhaul the government employment by firing persons who are not ideologically aligned with the president and replaced with loyalists. And they would boost free and fair trade. Tariffs. Under the climate area, they would fully repeal tax code subsidies for green energy companies that are in the Inflation Reduction Act. They would weaken the EPA authority. They would lower emission standards. They would support new fossil fuel projects. They would eliminate all Department of Energy demonstration grants. They would dismantle labor standards, defund renewable energy projects, end all federal project labor standards. For the federal government, they would no longer require unions for contracts. They would take anyone who could deliver the best product for the cheapest price. They would repeal the Antiquities Act of 906, which gives the president the ability to protect cultural and land resources when threatened by companies who want to use them for things that would threaten their ability to survive, like national parks. They would eliminate programs that protect public health in communities and promote environmental justice. And this will then increase health inequities. When you are breathing bad air, drinking bad water, and it isn't addressed by the government, you have more illness. They will withdraw from the US from the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement. And they will end NOAA and the National Weather Service, who provide vital information on things like hurricanes, flood, anything on the weather. They're saying, no, we don't need that. Immigration, increase funding of the wall, dismantle the Department of Homeland Security, and put all enforcement on immigration issues across all of the departments. And they would fast track immigrants who can pay a premium. So if you have money, you can get into the United States. If you don't, good luck. There would be mass deportations of people already here, separation of families, and they would end the birthright for citizens, so that if you're born in the United States, but your parents are immigrants, you could be sent back. How would they expand presidential powers? They would place all federal departments, including the Department of Justice, under the president. He would have the ability to use federal law enforcement to target journalists, protesters, and any who oppose his decisions. He would limit First Amendment freedoms by surveilling Americans and their data without warrants. Voting, if you make a simple mistake on your application, it could be a criminal offense. He is transferring the people who handle that now are the Department of Office of Civil Rights, but he's transferring all of that to the criminal section of the Department of Justice. It gives the federal government access to state voter rolls, which they don't have now. You can punish social media platforms for limiting election falsehoods. So he's saying it's okay if you put falsehoods up there. Yes. Up on social media. We're not going to limit you. They're adding a citizenship question to the US Census, which means that immigrants may or may not want to handle that because it could have all sorts of repercussions, which then means that a lot of communities would be undercounted and get less money, which is not a good thing for them. And it discourages federal agencies from promoting voter access. The impact of some of these things on Michigan is pretty substantial. Nearly 400,000 Medicaid recipients could be dropped. Families will see tax and energy increases. Ending Title I, 5,300 teachers will lose their jobs. Student loan repayments will increase by $2,700 to $4,100 a year. Nearly 8,000 low-income children will be negatively impacted with the ending of Head Start. And Michigan's 30,000 federal civilian employees could lose their jobs and be replaced by loyalists to the new president. And all people who have health insurance would lose the protections of the ACA. Again, these proposals will have a difficult time getting through Congress at this time. But Project 2025 takes a very long road, long view. the overturning of Roe v. Wade was decades in coming, and had a lot of steps, including the three new Supreme Court justices. But they're not going to end this. They are going to continue it, and they know that all of it cannot occur this time, but they will keep on it. And that's why we have to be vigilant of looking at who we vote for, not just at the presidential level, but all the way up and down the ballot. I mean, I Googled everyone I voted for this time to find out a little bit more about what their thinking was. Because if we don't do that, what they are looking to do is to get more and more people who agree with them to be coming on all the way up and down the ballot. And eventually they believe they can achieve this agenda. So I guess the questions we have to ask ourselves, is Project 2025 a democratic proposal for this country? Or does it bend more towards a fascist government in America? And that's what I hope we can talk about a little bit, but after you've heard a lot of these things. So what can you do? We need to be vigilant and learn more. We need to go to town halls where people who are running for office are there. We need to question them on how they feel about a lot of these things that are in Project 2025 and their support or non-support for Project 2025. We need to share information and concern with our families and friends. And most important, we need to vote. And we need to work to have everyone vote and be knowledgeable voters. So I guess, what would you like to talk about relative to this? What do you think about what I've told you about Project 2025? Anybody?
I would like to know, how can we get this more available? I mean, people I talk about, they say, what's that? A lot of people don't know about it. So I don't know why it's not. I mean, it's out there some, like I've seen some campaign coverage about it on TV about this, but it needs to be somewhere even more apparent for people to look into. I don't know. That's what I like to. I know time is very short, but there should be billboards. I mean, in your face about this. I don't see a whole lot of that. I don't know. That's more of a comment than a question.
And we can't stop worrying about it after this one, whether Trump wins or loses, because this is going to be an ongoing effort from the Heritage Foundation. And obviously, it's very well funded. If you can spend $22 million and to involve training people, recruiting people, transition teams, and all of those things, it's extremely well funded. And we have to not stop talking about it after the election, even if Kamala wins, or when Kamala wins, I should say. We have to keep talking about it because that's the only way we will be prepared for the 10th iteration of this kind of project. Paul?
Yeah, thank you very much, Marjorie, for giving us this glimpse of 2025.
I apologize for coughing so much.
Oh, well, you can't help that. I apologize. We're wearing out your voice, but thank you for speaking to us in spite of it. What I'm worried about the most is that it is, I think most of us would agree, a step toward fascism where you have expanding the presidential powers in a way that would make him much like a dictator. And the more power, say if Trump were to win, the more power he gets, the more the legislature doesn't matter. If he's in control of all of the federal bureaucracy, including all the cabinets, including the Department of Justice, which traditionally has been a wall of separation. He complains that Biden is prosecuting him, which it's clearly walled off in the Justice Department with special prosecutor and everything. But yet at the same time, he promises to prosecute his enemies, to take over the department, the very thing that he complains about falsely, what Biden and Harris are doing. So, I mean, all the other details, I'm not going to say they don't matter, but once we have a fascist dictator installed, he won't care what the legislature does. He'll use force. He's already talked about using force to bring out the National Guard and the military to support his ideas, his plans. So
And we can't count on
it's
the
very
courts.
clear.
I mean, we really cannot count on the courts for a very long time. You know, I listened to someone the other day who said, at least in the beginning, courts will try to push back on a lot of things, but that won't last for long. You know, when you
We've
get
seen with the
loyalists,
self-appointed justices, and Judge Eileen Cannon in Florida, boy, she is just in his back pocket, obviously, and he'll just appoint more and more judges to his favor. All the courts will be like the Supreme Court, overwhelmed with his loyalists. So this will happen very quickly, I'm afraid, if he gets in there. Again, he knows how to get by the guardrails.
yeah. And if you don't do what he wants you to do, you'll be fired. I mean, he will have complete control for hire, fire at department levels. And so, I mean, those could be revolving doors, but it doesn't matter. The next one will be just as bad or worse, as we saw in the Justice Department during his first administration.
Exactly. He fired many people, went through it because they wouldn't do what he wanted, and then he didn't care whether they were approved by the Senate because he just made them all acting. Like he wanted an acting attorney general to prosecute his political enemies.
That's right.
So he won't care if it's not in the Constitution or isn't passed by the legislature.
And
That's the definition of a dictator, right?
And if this moves down to the states and whatever, if they're bringing up lots of people who are running for the states, and we've seen some of them running who haven't made it yet at the state level. But if they do, then we will have states doing the same thing. And pretty soon our communities. Yes, Dave?
The issue I'm concerned about, I mean, there's a whole thing, but the idea of who wrote this, were there any what we would call mainstream Republicans involved, or was it all the radical conservatives?
Boy, I glanced through the 400 people, but I don't remember their names, Dave. I don't think so. I don't think any of the mainstream people were involved. At least nothing popped out at me as I reviewed the names, which is good.
Yeah.
But the problem is they're not speaking up now. As bad as things have been, I say, where is George Bush? Where is Mitt Romney? Why aren't they speaking out? As Liz Cheney has done and others are doing more and more. I mean, we need them to not be on the sidelines. We need them to be actively trying to retake their party rather than being passive and letting him do what he's doing.
This is Randy. And just one question, but among probably thousands of questions that could be asked. Are there groups that you're saying that are taking the lead on opposing Project 2025? And do they have coalitions, just like the Heritage Foundation has got a large coalition of groups that are supporting these, what I would call very radical fascist ideas? Are there groups out there that are making it a major part of their mission is to educate and to activate people to vote in accordance with this anti-democracy agenda.
The counterbalance to the Heritage Foundation is the Brookings Institution, which is kind of the democratic answer. A lot of their things that they are putting out are very good and very specific. So if you go to their website, they are good, but they aren't doing a lot of reaching out other than educating people with things on their website or going on TV on shows and talking about it. So I have not seen any coalitions. The Democratic Party leadership has done a little, but there hasn't been any advocacy coalitions coming up yet. I think it really surprised, but remember, they've been doing this since 1981. And people haven't been hearing about them at all, at least this year. A number of people are paying attention. And, so kudos to the people who raised the alarm, even though Trump denies it, that he's really for everything.
Some other people on the call, would you like to ask some questions? Kaya, Jim, Eileen, Danny.
Not good for young people.
Well, Danny, you've been advocating for students and students being able to afford to pay their college bills. So I heard that's one piece that's in there. And
so let them know. Educate them to look at it, because it really is a terrible thing. I mean, he's going to increase the repayment of student loans rather than forgiving them.
Now, of course, another major campaign theme going on is women's right to access to reproductive justice. And that's at its heart, besides being a right for women, and I've been an advocate for women's rights as long as I've been an advocate for healthcare, is that they have they've got major efforts to suppress women's or take away women's access to healthcare when it comes down to abortion, birth control, and so forth. And it makes me angry. I'll put it that way, that they could talk that way, because it's people's religion, it's people's right to be able to, women's right to make these choices, not for a group of men with the Heritage Foundation. And God forbid that there are women there too that are supporting this, maybe through their own personal beliefs.
It's interesting to me that I did not see them call for an outright, ban of all abortions in this. They do everything around the edges, which means that they are banned, but they don't absolutely say that. And of course, Trump has said he wouldn't sign it. I don't believe that, but that was very interesting in reading this. Paul?
Yeah. I'm curious how third parties may be reacting to this. And of course, some of us older ones, we know what happened with Ralph Nader in Florida in 2000, where the election was decided by just a few votes there. And even Michigan went to Trump in 2016 by less votes than what Jill Stein had won. And I wonder what, the third parties, they can make a difference in the election, but by being spoilers.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to, spoiler the Democratic Party so that allow Trump in the 2025 to come in. And has there been any response from them about 2025?
I haven't seen any. The only thing I've seen on the third party thing is that Kamala now has out a pretty direct ad being concerned about a spoiler, Jill Stein being a spoiler for the election, and warning people that that could happen, that they may not like Trump or want him in, but voting for her could make that a reality. I don't know whether you've all seen that ad. It's been fairly new. Yeah,
Now,
Dave, did you have
I-
your hand up?
Yeah, I'm concerned that not just the decision of the Supreme Court. We know who five of the justices are, that are quite frankly Christian in an ultra conservative bent. But I'm afraid that an awful lot of mainline Christians, Jews, and Muslims, traditional ones, are being fed by this stuff and think that we'll have a cleaner, nicer society. I think that may be one of the bigger problems we have is our so-called friends, our Jewish friends, our Christian friends, our Muslim friends that quite frankly think they're doing the right thing. And Project 25 scares me. I think the number one reason for me is my people that I see in the church pew, my people that I see in the synagogue, my people that I see in the mosque that are good people, they're going to fall for this. And I don't know. We mentioned the Brookings Institute. Brookings
Yes.
Institute
Mhm.
probably everybody kind of knows who the ACLU is, I would say. But I would say only about 3 out of 10 people know what the Brookings Institute is.
Yeah.
I took some history classes early, not history, some um, political classes early on, so I learned all about the Brookings Institute. But the reality is, is there a way for us to get the word? I know it's short now, and I think you make a really good point on talking about this been going on since 1981. I remember, well, I think I told you personally, as early as February of this year, at a table with the whole family, um, one of my four, I got four grandkids, but three of them are women that are all college educated, and they got in an argument with me. There's no way Roe versus Wade can be overturned. They really believe that. And again, one's a nurse at Henry Ford, and she couldn't believe it. But what is there anything we can do to educate people, people of faith? I'm not talking just about Christians, Jews, Muslims, the sensible people in the world. How can we educate them, or is there anything we can do?
Well, one of the things that bothers me very, very much is that we don't talk about our Constitution and the separation of church and state and why that's important. We don't teach civics. People don't understand why we should have it. This movement of Trump's is clearly a Christian nationalist movement that has nothing to do with Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
does not look at the things that Jesus taught. It's teaching what they want. And they're calling really in here, and I didn't get into it, to really make America a Christian nationalist state. And where the church, as they see it, would drive all social efforts. So separation of church and state is something that I talk to people about. It was in there for a reason, because we have many religions in America, and one religion, and all of the religions have a lot of the same values for the most part. So, Paul?
Yeah, just to reinforce that, I've forgotten the exact name of the book, but some of you know Jim Wallace, who's written. He is a what I call a follower of Jesus Christian, and not a right-wing fundamentalist. And he has written a book about white Christian nationalism. It's gone along with his other books on racism in America. So yeah, some of us in the church have been speaking out, but I don't think the churches are speaking out forcefully enough. It just reminds me, of the history of back in Italy and Germany. Did the church speak out, or were they more enablers?
And if you don't speak out, you get stood on.
Yes.
You get run over.
Right. So, we don't want to think about that, but I think we got to be worried about that. Just like your daughters didn't worry about Roe v. Wade being overturned. Most Americans don't think that Trump will actually become a dictator, and they don't want to think about fascism. But all the signs are there, as far as I can see.
That's exactly right.
Well, I'm going to just say that Paul and I go back a ways when Gray Panthers supported an amicus brief supporting Planned Parenthood, saying that people of faith have a right to be able to believe what they believe as well, and then many of these beliefs are the majority belief of maybe the top 10 religions in this country, where they believe that women should be treated well and women should be given the right, and that's based on statistics. So it's kind of like the tail wagging the dog with certain religions that are trying to tell, well, because I believe in Christianity, therefore everyone else has to believe as I believe. So we who are people who are Methodist, who are Jewish, who are United Church of Christ, Unitarian, and so forth, we have statistically beliefs that do not support taking a woman's right to choose.
You're
So
taking away freedoms if you take away the ability of people also to practice their religion the way they want.
that's kind of like, this is not new territory. We were just we were standing out there supporting both the governor's lawsuit as well as Planned Parenthood with our amicus brief that said a majority of people who are identify as people of faith, or for that matter, people who see themselves as humanist or atheist, still also believe that people should have the freedom to choose how they believe about choice and women's right. So that's
and the freedom to pray the way they want and to marry who they want. And there are a lot of, if you take just a very narrow view of a lot of things, then you take freedoms away from other people.
so.
Rich, what do you think about the whole religious thing and the role of the church in all of this?
Let's have a preacher.
Yeah.
How about you, Rich?
We got a Reverend Rich Peacock here.
I think the church in general is hamstrung because we can't endorse political candidates. There's a movement in the United Methodist Church that has the origin in Micah chapter 6, verse 8. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. So we have t-shirts that say, be just, be kind, be humble. And so that's the way we're trying to tamp down the rhetoric.
And I think, knowing what's in Project 2025 and that this is the intention of that movement to accomplish these things, that if people know, then they have to be able to say themselves, is this kind? Is this just? Is this what kind of country I want to live in?
Now, my pastor preached a sermon on this slogan with a special emphasis on being kind. But she didn't go the next step, which would be, is Trump being kind to immigrants? Is Trump being kind to women in terms of their health care? So the church kind of pulls its punches, unfortunately.
And
So
taking
that's
money away
why,
from disability.
yeah. So that's why people like me spend less time on charity and more time on politics. I view a Christian necessity of being in, but not of the Democratic Party.
Mhm.
So I'll be campaigning for Carl Malinga this afternoon. That's what we have. That's what we have to do.
Paul?
Yeah, that's great, Rich. Our church locally, we have our Detroit Metropolitan Association United Church of Christ created 250 yard signs, and most of them distributed in Detroit, and I wish we had done more, that say in big letters, vote, but then underneath, to preserve our democracy and our freedoms. So it doesn't say vote for Democrats, because that would violate separation. And I know, unfortunately, some of the fundamentalist churches don't worry about that. They, from the pulpit, say who to vote for, and they hand out voter cards with candidate names who to vote for. We don't do that, but if we urge people to vote to preserve our democracy and our freedoms, well, when you think about it, you know, the major candidates, who is actually doing that and who isn't? Who's doing the opposite? Takes a little bit of thinking, but at least it's something. But I wish we all could be doing something like that. And it is really sad to see that that religious organizations or people who call themselves Christians, for example, are not, as you already said, are not following Jesus, but are imposing their own view, their own religious views, which I heard some preachers say that Trump being that bullet that just missed him in an assassination attempt, that was a sign from God. That was how God was voting in the election, that he made that bullet stray so it missed Trump. And that is just abhorrent to any of my faith views. And whatever somebody says their faith views are, they cannot impose it on everyone else. And that's a fundamental thing that is missed, I think.
Yeah, in a democracy, we all make compromises now and then. I mean, I'm thinking of when Medicaid was expanded in Michigan, you know, there were things that we were very much against, but there were a few things that we ended up compromising a little bit on, because that's what you do in a democracy. You don't give up the basic stuff, but if there are things that can get you so that you have the opportunity to fight another day and win all of the rest of that, you do it. And we will never have a president who does everything we want them to do, and it makes me very angry when people I think you need to give your point of view, and you need to say, I disagree with that policy, or I disagree with this, and I wish that. But, no one's going to be perfect. That's just the way it is. We need to learn to live together and to compromise.
And consider the alternative.
Oh, I like that shirt, Rich.
Here's the T-shirt.
Yes.
And that being humble and being kind are really important values, as you say, but being just is what we're talking about here today. So I guess I'm going to ask too, we only have a certain number of minutes left for the presentation, and bottom line is, so what kind of recommendations, Margie, would you have for Gray Panthers? We're a pretty independent group, and I'd say we're more informed than a lot of other groups out there about these issues. What do you think are some things
I think
that,
urging all of your members to talk to candidates about Project 2025, and to make sure that they are knowledgeable and that they spread that information, and then they vote their conscience.
well, it's certainly when we're talking about the election coming up in just less than 2 weeks, this is the timing to do this.
Yeah, and you wait to have Mr. Malinga talk about it, Rich.
You sure?
I mean, it's just really important that people understand that this has been coming over many, many years, that they have been planning for this day, or what they hope would be this day, and having Trump back in the presidency. And even if he loses, they're going to keep going. And we need to be more vigilant and more educated, and educating more people on what's going to happen.
Well, one of the things that I kind of concerned about is that Project 2025 gives support for what was came a recommendation under something called the Republican Commission, and that recommended raising the age for Social Security from 67 to 69.
Mhm.
Well, regardless of what party you're in, if you're on Social Security, or you're hoping to be on Social Security in the near future, what this is doing is taking money out of your pocket. And then our friend, the person who's running against Kamala is saying, I won't cut Social Security.
Yeah.
Same time,
Almost everything in Project 225
but
affects
then
low-income people and people in general. I mean, the tariffs are just a good example. Most of the tariffs, that he wants to do, no matter how much, don't do much to the rich, but people at the lower end get really screwed.
well, and just finishing my thought about Social Security, because I think it is one of those things that could influence people. If you're on Social Security, you don't want to lose the benefits for yourself or your children, is that they would be having they would be having to be able to say that your Social Security would be subject to that there would be no taxes on your Social Security. Excuse me for that delay. And that sounds awfully good. No taxes on your Social Security. Well, what that does is it undermines the funding source for Social Security. So it's kind of like it's like tricking people into, yeah, I don't want to pay taxes. But if they don't have rich people paying taxes on Social Security, well, there goes the funding for it. So it's another a hidden.
It's a way of getting your agenda through the back door.
Yeah. So that'll be something I'll be bringing up at our national level too.
Mhm.
And any other questions or comments from the people that are on here? I haven't heard anything from Lee and someone named Trey Z Pixel 5. So I don't know.
That's our Trey.
Huh?
That's our board member, isn't it, Trey?
No. Oh, it is it Trey?
It is. Can you hear me?
Oh, okay. Well, gosh, I've got you down for another. I didn't have that as your Trey. You're an important person on our board. Is there anything you would like to say?
I just want everybody to remember that a big part of making this all work is the separation of church and state from the Bill of Rights. The smartest of the founders figured that out. You've got to have everybody free to do their own religious thing, but not have the government involved in doing anybody's religious thing, because when you get them mixed, you automatically get a government that says to the hierarchy of the church, tell everybody what a good government we are, and we'll slide you some bucks or other support. And conversely, you get some of the religious leadership saying to the government, don't let us have any competing religion.
Thank you, Trey. I know you'd have something important, definitely important to say. What about Lee? And again, I'm not remembering who you are, Lee, but if you can introduce yourself and if you have any comments, I want everybody to have a chance, and you and Jim and Kaya too. Before we finish this up, I wanted everybody to have a chance. And Danny.
I just wanted to let you know that Lee did put in the chat that they are just listening today, but they're thanking all of us for the very interesting discussion.
Okay. We don't want to force people to have to talk if they don't really want to at this moment. And Jim or Eileen, anything?
Is there any plans for doing something after the election to get a concentrated effort to work on blocking the 2025 project?
Good question. Maybe Marjorie, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, the only thing I know is that there's a lot of people in the Democratic Party that is looking at if they try to implement some of the things that just an executive to do, if it is Trump who wins, is that they are preparing immediate court cases to try to at least block immediate implementation. Other than that, I don't know a lot about what's going on, but I think, our personal responsibilities is to not let this issue die.
Yeah, it's a huge issue.
Mm-hmm.
Jim, did you want to, and Jim or Kaya, did you want to say anything? No pressure, of course, but just inviting you.
I don't really have anything to add, but I just want to point out that even if Trump himself does not win, if we get a Republican legislature, they can still try to introduce some of these measures. And we have to be very vigilant about stopping them.
Well, I'm going to say with a kind of a pat on the Gray Panthers back is that we're one group at least that's trying to pay attention to some of these more controversial issues. And of course, there are plenty of other organizations that are looking out for things specific to their own interest area, but we're trying to look at it across the generational line here too, that what these things are talking about is affecting not just older folks, but younger people and people who are trying to raise a family and so on and so forth.
And just think of it, the impact of what they're going to do in the Department of Education, not teach DEI and a whole lot of other things. What they're doing is trying to create the next generation to be more supportive of the ideology that they are promoting.
Well, if there's no further, Jim, did you want to say anything? And we still have maybe a minute or two yet. But that's okay. If you'd rather not do that right now, we'll be having our board meeting coming up. At this point, I'm going to say thank you to Marjorie Mitchell. Let's give her more than one hand, so to speak.
Oh, I just felt really bad about my voice. My allergies have been terrible.
Well, we all go through health kind of things, and certainly health is sort of like an area that we all experience it.
Oh.
kind of
Thank
I don't know
issue.
you.
how I did that thumbs up multiple,
But yeah, you can do with your hand, there's stuff on the menu where you can show your hands up here too. Well, Marjorie, this is what we do for every speaker that comes to Gray Panthers. So I don't know if you remember this or not, but we're giving you two things as a word of thank you for you being here, because your message was so important to us and important to me, I'll speak that way. Is that number one, we're giving you a free membership in Gray Panthers.
Thank you.
Number two, we'll be in considering some kind of an honorarium during our board meeting following this. And so I think that's, and then we would be happy to give you a Gray Panthers t-shirt along with this, being a member. So look, you can know that you're not just a speaker at Gray Panthers, but you're one of us. And so thank you again.
Certainly am. Thank you, though, for inviting me. Have a good day and a good weekend, everyone.
Okay, all right, thank you. You're welcome to stay on with us, Margie. I know you may have other things, but we do have a meeting coming up here in which there'll be reports on a number of other things, such as the
I need to get going, but I appreciate your attention to the presentation. Thank you.
great to see you, Marjorie.
Great to see you.
For
Thank
those
you.
of you who are not board members, we do have a program coming up here in which, and we would appreciate, it will include a report on what we're doing on the national level. Some exciting things are happening with Gray Panthers at the national level. We'll having some more information about potential cuts to Social Security, report on peace issues from Rich Peacock. We'll be having hopefully an environmental update when Fred Miller from Sierra Club joins us. Danny will be giving us a little update on the importance of students being voters. And Paul and I will talk about what we can do to turn out the vote, which seems to be a nice fit for our presentation today. So with that, I can give a little report on what's happening with our national Gray Panthers. And you all don't hear about it much, but I'm the chair of what they call the National Council of Gray Panther Networks. So we have had 10 people from 10 different Gray Panther organizations around the country. And at the same time, we just, as of this last week, now have 2 more Gray Panther networks, a network in Colorado and a network in San Diego. So these are both places where they used to have a Gray Panther network, and now they're starting up again. So the appeal for Gray Panthers is still there in different states. So we'll be having, and I've talked to a woman from a group out of Berkeley, California. That's where Gray Panthers were kind of started in a lot of ways. And she's excited about maybe having a coalition of California Gray Panthers to work on issues. But we'll be having reports on climate change, strategies for encouraging people to vote, and reproductive justice. And so those are things that are coming up on the agenda, just coming up out Monday. So I will share a little information. That was my report on the National Council. Dave, did you want to share some more information about proposed cuts in Social Security benefits? And or other thing, and Dave, you also cover issues having to do with unions. So
I think we know all the bad news, but I think it's something that there are right now 2 bills to correct Social Security and implement some changes in it. One is sponsored by our friend Bernie Sanders, and that's Social Security Act expansion, Senate Bill 393, and Representative John Larson is doing most of the exact same bill in the House. Obviously, they don't have much chance of passing, but God bless, I mean, they were there. And I think that the reality is that, as we were talking about, I think, and this is the part that bothers me a little bit about, I don't mean anybody in on this call, because if we're in on this call, we care. But the overwhelming majority of retirees don't care if they increase the age, because it's not affecting them, and it's sad to hear that. I just returned from a short vacation with my grandson, and he said his generation very much cares, not just about Social Security, but the condition of our country. And he implies, and I think he's absolutely right, that this generation of young people, whether they be 18 or 40, cares much more about a just society than the average, whether it be baby boomer or whatever. Um, but the reality is that they're concerned that they don't have a voice. And it's they, as it was just stated just a minute ago, the important thing is that if they get out and vote, they can make a difference. My grandson had already voted, and he said most of his friends already had too. So it's just it's something to think about. But the people that are, when they start talking about raising it to 69 to retire, um, again, it's a tough road to hoe if you're 65 now and this thing passes. I don't know if it'll pass, but it's just like Project 2025. It's going to hurt us one way or the other. The reality for Social Security is that it could be solvent tomorrow if they just take the cap off. It's that simple. And we all know that, but it just whether it'll happen or not, I just don't know. And then on the union front, just I'm sorry. Is there any questions on Social Security? Okay, then I'll give my very brief labor report. The longshoremen were on a short strike here just recently, and they're back to work. It was the economics were settled, but they were left till the first of the year to take on probably the major issue, and it was AI, use of artificial intelligence in loading and unloading the all the vessels that come into our ports. And it's something that, quite frankly, longshoremen, it all depends on your seniority. A longshoreman with 2 years seniority might only be making $35,000 a year, but a longshoreman with many years of seniority is going to make twice what the average American makes. So there has to be respect for the way longshoremen work is seniority and hours. A person just starting out getting into the union may not work 40 hours a week in the first 2 or 3 years. So it takes a while to build up the seniority to get there. So that's about the talk of the longshoremen. The elections around the country for union representation is the victories are higher than they've ever been before since the 40s and the 50s. But they're doing well, usually small units, but they're working. And we all know about the UAW success, and it's happening. I don't know that much about Stellantis. If anybody does, please throw it in. But I've heard that they're in real trouble. And I mean, I've always been a Chrysler person. I drove Jeeps until my last car, the last two cars have been Fords because Fords was much more technological. The automatic braking, the lane changing, all the safety features. So if anybody's got anything on that, and also it's significant. We don't hear much about it. The CHIPS Act that was passed in I think it was in the first year of the Biden administration. The CHIPS Act has made a significant difference in the amount of manufacturing being done in the United States, and for my trade, the amount of construction that's being done. It's literally doubled the amount of manufacturing jobs that are being created, and when I say manufacturing jobs, through construction of new plants, and they have to hire people to fill those plants, and then the construction of those things, which are done by the building trades. The work in the building trades again has more than doubled, and it's kind of interesting. A lot of my brothers and sisters are supporting the T guy, and if you look at the actual hours worked, the hours worked, I won't even count the last year because of the pandemic, looming pandemic, and that. But there wasn't a lot of construction at all. There wasn't a lot of manufacturing at all. But the reality is that there's been much more in the last 3 years than there was in the 4 years before. So the building trades are very happy with what's happening in Washington right now. The CHIPS Act was probably the most significant of the bills passed that helped manufacturing and building trades. So I think has anybody got any questions? I'm about done.
So we got anybody got questions for Dave? It's a big issue when we're talking about both Social Security and what's happening with labor unions, and certainly labor unions are playing a big part one way or the other in our election. Let's see, Reverend Rich Peacock, what are you going to have to share with us on the issues of peace and war? And
this last week, the New York Times had a major article regarding nuclear weapons. It said that in terms of nuclear weapons, we need, or some people say we need, a once in a generation overhaul of nuclear weapons across 23 states. And we need to spend $1.7 trillion over 30 years. For example, they want General Dynamics to build 12 new nuclear ballistic submarines by 2042. Now, General Dynamics is having trouble getting enough workers. So they've been traveling to schools in New England to inspire kids to join the shipyards. They're hiring 5,000 people a year to build these new nuclear ballistic missile subs with their powerful nuclear weapons. And the argument is that the 14 boomers that we now have, the 14 nuclear subs that we now have that can fire nuclear weapons, are about 40 years old. And they always use the argument that China has more warships than the US. So there's this major move to build new submarines. Also, there's the big move to refurbish the Oak Ridge Y-12 plant, which supplies the uranium for the nuclear bombs. The problem is, from the defense people's standpoint, this rebuilding is years behind schedule and billions of dollars over budget, and won't be ready until 2031. Well, and then There are the 400 Minuteman ICBMs. These intercontinental ballistic missiles can reach any target in Russia in 30 minutes. And the argument is that they are old. And so we need to have new intercontinental ballistic missiles. And the new ones will be called the Sentinel. So we want to have another 400 new Sentinel ballistic missiles. And what this means is that all of the current missiles will have to be dug up. The silos will have to be dismantled, and we'll have to build new silos in states like Wyoming, North Dakota, Colorado, Nebraska, and Montana. So it's an immense project of digging up silos and putting in new silos. Now, there is a basic redundancy in our nuclear deterrence strategy. We don't need those ICBMs, either the current ones or the new ones. Even if you believe in deterrence, we have enough power on the missiles of our nuclear submarines that any big strike by Russia would assure the submarines could destroy Russia. And you can bomb the 400 silos because everybody knows where they're at. But finding a submarine is harder, one Navy commander said. Finding a submarine is harder than finding a grapefruit in outer space. So we have enough power with the submarines. We don't need these 400 ICBMs. And to top it off, this new Sentinel missile, the cost was $96 billion in 2020, but now it's up to 144. Huge cost increase. There is always cost overruns with military equipment. So our next president will have to decide whether or not to go through with this nuclear modernization. Of course, we think that's not wise. And Congress has continued to vote money for it. But ultimately, the foreign policy set by the administration is what makes the determination. So no matter who the next president is, they have to be lobbied to stop the modernization of our entire nuclear force. One other little area, the simplest message to send to Congress these days is no war with Iran. The Middle East is in a multifaceted war. Israel against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Iran. And the worst possible thing is for Israel to attack Iran and to pull America into attacking Iran. So, 4 words to be sent to the president and Congress. No war with Iran. No war with Iran. So I'll stop now for comments and questions.
Well, you certainly have a big area there to discuss. What are other people's comments or questions for Rich? And I see Dave's hand up. You're on mute.
Okay, I'm not now. I was a submariner in my Navy days, and I I'm really I totally agree with your statements there, except that what's happened in the Israeli war since October 7th of last year has been that we have provided them with materials that can shoot down 99% of the missiles. And these are small rockets. And I'm wondering, can anybody get these through? If we had the ICBMs, I mean, and again, I know how hard it is to find a submarine, right? Because that was part of my job. But the reality is, don't we have, and I would assume Russia has the same, and China, the ability to shoot down 9 out of 10 nuclear weapons that are fired?
Well, I don't think anybody knows that for a fact.
Uh,
Um, and we're sending more missiles to Israel. At the same time, however, Senator Bernie Sanders has introduced 6 resolutions to stop the sale of more missiles to Israel. And because they're special resolutions, they will come to the Senate floor sometime after November 12th. So once the election is over, Peace Action and other groups will be lobbying members of Congress to halt the military missile sales to Israel.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Shows how there's a whole lot to do after the election. Yes, Paul?
Yeah, I thought it was announced that the Biden administration was warning Israel, if you don't give more aid to the Palestinians in Gaza, and in particular northern Gaza, that they would in 30 days at least shut down some sort of military supply. And can't that be, in other words, can't that be done without congressional approval? Do you know? That's what I assumed they could do that.
Well, repeatedly, the United States has said that Israel is not hindering aid into Gaza. So I'm not sure we can trust that 30-day window to be adhered to. The cynical part of me says that 30-day time period expires after the election. And so it's trying to throw a bone to Kamala Harris to show that she is working to stop the war and get more food into Gaza. We all know that the Arab American vote in Michigan is crucial. So cynically, this looks like throwing a bone to Kamala Harris.
Better a bone than Trump, though.
Well said. Well said.
Well, thank you, Rich. And I guess this is another subject that we could have full day conversations on, and it deservedly so. I'm going to turn next to Fred Miller, who's from the Sierra Club. And thank you, Fred, for hopping on. I'm always grateful that you will give part of your Saturday to give us an update on what's going on with the environment.
Yes, thank you, Randy. Well, all the most of the major environmental organizations that have grassroots operations in Michigan have turned their attention to the election. I'm not going to go into detail about what they're up to. since I don't think we're supposed to be pushing electoral issues exactly in this. But I would say, there's a lot going on as far as that goes. The Sierra Club's active. The Michigan League of Conservation Voters, basically pushing for environmental candidates, particularly in the state house races, and of course in the presidential election. Some of us are also out there, as I think I was last time that I reported, trying to get people to think environment and climate as they go to vote. And we'll be back, some of us, at the Oakland County Farmers Market. I think that there's some people there today, this morning. We'll be back again next week. Anybody wants to stop by and say hello, and pick up our information about the climate. Obviously, we've seen in the last few weeks just how bad the climate crisis has already gotten, with the devastation of hurricanes fueled by hot water in the Gulf of Mexico, created by climate change, and what they've done throughout the Southeast, particularly in Florida and North Carolina. So, it seems like people should know that now's the time to draw the line and make sure that we have the most active climate crisis programs, instead of the other point of view that we should just simply forget about climate. It doesn't really change. There is no such thing. That's what people are up to. But there are other things going on at the same time. There's the issues in front of the Michigan Public Service Commission. And there will be some lawsuits, I think. One of the big issues in front of the Public Service Commission that people can weigh in on, and that many of us have lately, is the effort to get serious improvements in the electrical grid. There are a couple of new lines that have been proposed and have to be approved by the Public Service Commission. What this would do would make it much easier to add renewable energy within the state of Michigan, and to rely on new renewable energy in states that are near Michigan to deal with Michigan's power needs. The Sierra Club and other environmental organizations are supporting this effort, while at the same time recognizing that there are complaints about the pathways for these new high-powered lines, and that they should be taken seriously by the Public Service Commission, but that the matter should be decided quickly, and the lines are absolutely necessary. And so that's been our message to the Public Service Commission at their hearings that they held a couple of weeks ago. Everybody can also echo that, or whatever your own point of view is. They are accepting public comments on their e-docket site. You can do it online. The particular grid issues, supporting grid improvements in order to support renewable energy is basically the message. In the legislature, we're going to see the data centers issue come up again in the lame duck session of the legislature. What happened previously, that the big tech companies are looking to get tax breaks on building huge data centers in Michigan. They got one of the two that they are aiming for, and the other one died for the moment, or was put off by the legislature. They had two bills. So the one that would provide a break on user taxes passed, but the other tax break that they were asking for didn't. So they'll be up again, and that fight will be there again. The position of the Sierra Club and other environmental organizations is these bills should not be passed without substantial environmental protections because of the huge amount of energy that these data centers, that they could break our plans to move to clean energy in the state of Michigan. And they should take responsibility for making sure that they're using clean energy and only clean energy, and that they are paying for the huge amounts of water that they use, and therefore hopefully conserving instead of simply pumping out of the aquifer for nothing, which they can do right now. So we want those kind of protections in these bills, in particular the one remaining tax break bill. And that'll be a hot issue in the lame duck session. One more thing I mentioned, Randy actually brought up to me when we were talking the other day, and that is the money coming from the federal government for the Inflation Reduction Act for all kinds of climate action, renewable energy, energy efficiency, and to local governments, and of course the individuals also in breaks on if energy efficient appliances and automobiles and such. We should be, and we have been, sort of informing and asking our local governments to take part and make use of that money, because it's a big it's a big pot that can make a big difference in our own local governments' climate action plans. The biggest thing right now is money coming through the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, SEMCOG, which got something like $1 million to make a plan, which they've done, something called the Priority Climate Action Plan, which was basically a setup for them then to go back to the federal government and get much more money for the local governments within the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments. That's like 7 counties. And all the local governments are part of SEMCOG. And so working with SEMCOG is probably the best way that local governments can get a piece of that action. They created a priority climate action plan, but some general guidelines and goals and ideas about what can be done by counties and local governments in this area. And they are using it to access Inflation Reduction Act money. And I think, again, the various environmental groups will be returning to that focus after the election as one of the things they do. I know the Michigan League of Conservation Voters has been very active, as the Sierra Club, in encouraging and helping and pointing out ways in which local governments can take part. The League of Conservation Voters has also done like door-to-door and leaflet and whatever, try to get people individually, particularly in neighborhoods where the need is greatest, to make use of the subsidies for clean energy and clean appliances and electric cars and all this kind of thing that are available to them to help make their own lives better, while at the same time making the energy transition happen on a local level. So that's my report. Randy, you're muted. So if you're.
Thank you, Fred, for your comprehensive report. Any questions for Fred on environmental policy issues? Okay, well, there's always a lot to do, isn't there?
Okay,
Uh,
thank you.
Thank you again, Fred. Danny, this has sounded like something that you have a special knowledge and compassion about, which is why do young voters matter and how can they be encouraged to vote?
Yes. So, being who I am, I made a little flyer for you all to take a look at that I'm going to put in the chat. This was also the best way for me to get all of my information out there. So I've put that in the chat as well as a link to the Michigan Department of State website. Um, so I'm going to go a little bit into about the impact of young voters, specifically on this upcoming 2024 election. Obviously, I myself am a young voter. I've been voting since I was 18. But that's not a super common occurrence. A lot of people don't really vote when they turn 18 because they don't really know much about voting, how to vote. Like I turned 18 in high school, so a lot of people aren't thinking about it when they're still in school, and that's something that I'd really like to see change, which the Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, is also very, very passionate about. So we now have early registration for voting, like pre-registration, like starting at all the time you can drive, 16. So that's something that is really awesome, getting people more involved. And I was in one of my classes the other day, and it's a mix between undergraduate students and graduate students. And one of the girls, it's her first time getting to vote because she wasn't old enough in the last election. And she was really, really excited to be able to vote for the first time. So it was just awesome seeing the enthusiasm of her being like, I get to vote. I'm so excited. She was genuinely excited. So going a little bit more into the data aspect. So Gen Z, which are adults currently about 18 to 27, make up about 42 million voters in this election. So it's a really large number that they make up. And nearly half of them are also people of color. So there's a lot of push for voting in communities of color, as well as just for young people to vote in general. I know our college campus has been really, really pushing for voting. We've had a ton of groups and organizations on campus helping students get registered to vote, helping them, learn the ways to vote in Michigan, especially with a lot of us traveling from different areas. And I know other college campuses as well are really pushing. They were even out yesterday at our local Myers store asking, hey, are you registered to vote? Do you need help learning to register to vote? And just trying to get whoever they could to register. And in 2022, Michigan led the nation in voter turnout of youth voters between aged 18 to I accidentally wrote 293. I'll correct that to 29. With a turnout rate of 37.6%, which is a fairly high average compared to the rest of the nation, which were a little bit lower, closer in the teens to 20s. For voting initiatives, there have been huge, huge pushes to get Gen Z to register to vote and to vote in this election, including from Secretary Benson, who hosted numerous voting events. She did roundtable discussions. She's done helped with a lot of the initiatives to get high schoolers registered to vote. And the Secretary of State's office has just been putting out a lot of information. Like there's a whole little young voter website that people can go to and kind of learn about voting, which was really awesome. Young people also have a lot of enthusiasm to vote. Gen Z and even some millennials, which are, you're closer to early 30s-ish people, have a heightened enthusiasm to vote. So, especially for this election, and polls are currently showing that young voters will be a decisive factor in this election, with 57% saying they're extremely likely to vote, which is a little bit higher than our last election when it was not a presidential election. And there's still the notion that only presidential elections matter, which is very false. All elections matter, local elections, all of that are really, really important. So that's something that I've always, pushed for. I've always voted in my local elections and my little, small elections, but not a lot of people do. Sometimes even my parents don't. I'm like, you need to vote. Like, I don't care if you don't know a lot about this, research it and you need to vote. And then top concerns in the country are also really, really driving voters. So the increased voter drive for young people can be linked to what young voters are concerned about. So things such as climate change, gun violence, reproductive rights, and the cost of living are things that are really driving our young voters, including myself, of course, to the polls to kind of get that those changes and to speak their mind on some of these topics. So young voters have a huge stake in this upcoming election, and campaigns are noticing. They're pushing for more social media advertising. They're pushing to do more trendy things on TikTok and to end up on people's For You pages to try to get their messages out there. It's not just one campaign, it's all campaigns. I get at least 5 voter text calls a day, at least right now. So there's also a push for digital campaigning to get people to pay attention, especially texts, because young people are more likely to text. So there's been a lot of push for that. And like they've been sending voter information to colleges. We've probably had 1,000 plus things, to current resident of, Eastern Michigan, whatever, of just voter information, some campaigns, some just general, like, hey, are you registered to vote? So there's definitely a huge push to get young people to vote in this election, especially at the college level. We are currently petitioning at Eastern to get voting day off for this year. We have not won that battle quite yet, but we are still petitioning to try to get election day off. We have in the past. I don't know how they decide that, but I don't know why we wouldn't have it off in general, especially because a lot of college kids have to travel home to vote if they didn't do absentee or early voting and they don't want to change their address to the Ypsilanti area. So those are kind of the main things about why our young voters are key in this election, why it's really important to talk to your family, your friends, your neighbors, your everybody about making sure that, they are voting and kind of get over that anxiety and nervousness of voting for the first time, because it can be really, really scary not knowing how to vote, how to research what you're walking into. And there's a ton of great resources out there now, like Vote 411. The League of Women Voters in Washtenaw have been putting out yard signs with the Vote 411 stuff on it. So when you're driving through Ipsy, you can see their yard signs with the Vote 411 information and how to, search and register and do everything related to voting. So I really encourage you all to have conversations with your kids and grandkids and neighbors and friends and family, nieces and nephews about making sure that they are registered to vote, and even talking them through what it looks like to vote in person or how it looks like to fill out an absentee ballot, just to help them understand like what it is and how to vote, because that can be the biggest mental barrier for young people, is not knowing what they're walking into.
So thank you, Danny. And it's another subject where we could have a full day conference about how to do these things. And so appreciate that you're a Gen X person who's part of our, for those who don't know, Danny's a member of our Gray Panthers board. So I'm grateful to you, Danny, for bringing that perspective that some of us may not think about. Are there questions for Danny that the rest of you might have? Questions or comments?
Dave?
Well, my question is something I've heard forever, it seems like. Do you think the average person in your dorm believes that Social Security will be there when they retire?
No, the majority of college students, including like my close friends and stuff, do not believe that we will get access to Social Security by the time we end up retiring. That is one thing that not a lot of people are aware of, but I think young, like when you're like 18 and 19, you're not thinking about it. But now that like my friends and I are coming into our mid-20s and we're starting to get into the workforce, like, we're being adults now. Like we're working and being adults. We're starting to think about it a little bit more, and we're like, that's not going to be there, or it's going to be really, really reduced to the point that, we can't survive on it. So that is a big concern for young people, whether it's voiced a lot or not. There's a lot of chit chat and conversation about it.
Danny,
Thank you.
Danny, just to help encourage them that Social Security may well be there. I'm 72 years old. When I was your age, everybody thought Social Security wouldn't be there. When I was eligible, I got it. So I obviously we have to always fight to keep it going, but I think that's a winnable fight, and we should let people know that. The other thing I want to tell the young folks is that they should obviously should think about retirement years as well. And one of the biggest problems we have, we're trying to do something about it legislatively for state employees at least, is the disappearance of defined benefit pension plans. Because Social Security is not sufficient for most people, and it was never intended to take the place of pension plan. 401ks cost more to run. They make significantly less money for the recipient, benefits for the recipients. And so the push, we're going to be on Facebook, the Coalition for Secure Retirement, I'm president of. We're going to be on with Facebook ads pushing the legislature to do it for public sector employees. But obviously the private sector needs a lot of work as well. So don't lose hope.
Well, would you also like to say something, Danny, about how young people could get Social Security benefits right now when they turn 18? There are different situations in which, like, say, a person whose parent has died, and so they could get survivor's benefits. So if your mom and dad were to die, Social Security could be there for younger people. So you don't have to wait till you're 65 or 67 or 69. And then I think there's other ways in which like disability, like if an 18-year-old suddenly gets in a car accident and they can no longer work, guess what? Social Security could be there for them too. So it's like an insurance policy that covers not just us older folk, but also younger people as well. Would you like to comment on any of that?
Yeah, I've definitely, thankfully, my parents are still alive and well, but I do have friends that unfortunately both of their parents have passed at being 20 in their young 20s. And they were very grateful to be able to receive their, beneficiary type stuff, be able to receive that assistance while both of their parents are gone. Um, and I think it's something that's not really known either, that there are other ways to get Social Security, even when you're young. Like if you suddenly become disabled or you're medically disabled in some way, shape, or form, there are ways to receive assistance sooner rather than later. And it's not just based on how old you are. So I think that's something that really needs to be shared more and really needs to be talked about a little bit more, because young people just kind of don't know about it. I didn't really know about it until like the past couple years. When I've had to, look into Social Security for other things or just general, seeing it online kind of thing.
So I guess go ahead, Dave.
Well, I actually comment more. It's significant though that the dependent pay for Social Security was there until you graduated from college. If you enrolled in college, you could draw the Social Security all the way through college, and I think it gave you five or 6 years to complete. But Congress eliminated that, so now it's just 18 and it goes away. That's the thing about Social Security. That Social Security isn't covering as many people as it used to, and it took it in the early years of Social Security went the other way. People
Okay.
it was mostly people of color.
What is there something, Danny, that in your position, because you're connecting with students all the time, that you might be able to a flyer or some kind of social media effort that you could use to reach out to some of those young students who's saying, hey, Social Security is not going to be there for me. Why should I worry about it?
Yeah, absolutely. When I wrote that article, I made sure to send it to all of our student organizations. So that was exciting. And then definitely there's ways for me to make a mini lesson Monday on why we need to care about Social Security even when we are nowhere near the retirement age. Because I got a long way to go, but I would like to be able to survive and retire at a normal age. Um, my grandma finally she retired in her 70s, but that was purely because she didn't want to stop working. Like she enjoyed working. But my mom might be retiring, and that's really exciting. And my dad might also be retiring, and they will get to possibly retire early because they just both turned 60. So, yeah, it's definitely something that I would love to share more information about.
Randy?
Oh,
Randy?
I think Randy froze. Well,
Thank you, Danny.
I
Who's
Danny?
Is
back?
that Trey trying to say something?
Yeah,
Yes,
great.
Go ahead.
thank you for that. Just to make sure we don't lose track of all of the people that we're trying to reach and reach them accurately, wouldn't you say you're a Gen Z?
Yes, I technically fall into Gen Z. I'm kind of in a weird spot that we call Zillennials. I was born in 99, so I was raised with a lot of millennial things, but I am technically considered a Gen Z just because of where I fall year-wise. But there's kind of like this weird middle ground where me and a lot of my friends fall, where we were kind of raised with both generation impacts because we were born in 99 and 2000. So, yes, I am, in fact, technically a Gen Z.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Danny. And I know we could have, again, every topic here, we could have more discussion. And I'm going to say we have one more item on our agenda here for this morning. And so we have a packed agenda for this second meeting of Gray Panthers. And I'm just asking, Paul, are there some things that you could suggest, you and I could suggest for helping get out the vote? Because getting out the vote is a big part of this whole meeting's focus today.
Yeah, and I'm going to mention a couple other things really quickly. The water bills that were introduced over a year ago for water as a human right and safe and affordable water for all in Michigan have been delayed, and they hopefully will be picked up in lame duck after the election. And I can't help but mentioning as a reproductive rights sponsor that we're seeing exactly what many professionals had predicted with these severe anti-abortion laws. Maternal deaths are increasing, and we're going to see an increase in the mortality rates and a widening of the white and black disparity. In other words, people of color will have even worse mortality rates. Really bad situation there. As far as get out the vote, as Rich Peacock mentioned about canvassing, I think at this point that's one of the best things to do to try to reach as many people as possible in person, to remind them to vote. Their yard signs, as we mentioned, but I think Randy, maybe you want to talk about phone banking, things like that, because we have a program for that with the Unitarian group and the National Council of Jewish Women, or Youth for Secular Society, I should say.
Yeah, I just got the group that I just retired from the Michigan UU Social Justice Network as of October 1st, but I'm continuing on to work for social justice through a lot of different channels, including the Gray Panthers. But we do have, we just got a $13,000, another grant to do phone banking. So that's one way to reach out to a lot of people who might be considered to be less likely voters, the people who would just stay home. So that could include young people, it could include people, Black and brown folks in Detroit. And actually, today is the first day of early voting. So for people in Detroit, this is the day that people should be. They could start their vote even today, either by absentee or by directly going to an early voting site. But there'll be others like 8 days, 7 days of early voting here in Michigan that will be starting up. So I've been encouraging people to go to do early voting as well as doing their absentee ballots, as well as showing up on the 5th. So we do have also some activities going on with what they call election protection, that means that will be people there who will be observing the elections throughout the state of Michigan to make sure that there aren't people that are trying to disrupt the voting. And there are right-wing groups that definitely want to be able to do that. So my experience though doing election protection work was that things in elections have actually gone pretty smoothly in Michigan. About having people there just to keep an eye on the polls is another strategy for helping make sure that our elections are fair and square. So that's sort of my short report with Get Out the Vote, and appreciate being able to work with Paul and other people throughout the state who I've got a network of about 24 churches that are engaged in Get Out the Vote activities. Any questions on the issue of what you can do to turn out the vote? So
Nomi Joy Rich has done a great job on that. Just want to plug that. So she's a person any of us could access.
Yeah, she's working for Jews for Secular Democracy, as well as my Michigan UU Social Justice Network, and she was a speaker that we had at last month's meeting. Any further announcements for today? If not, this is our public meeting session, and most of you on this call are members of the Gray Panthers board, which we can, what if we take maybe a 5-minute break here and we come back at maybe 10 after? So we have a little potty break and a little time, but it would be great if those of you who are on the board can rejoin us here